Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Stronger by Community. This is season 4, episode 7, and we are going live today with an incredible soul-led life coach. Her name is Amber, and I am so excited for you guys to meet Amber. She is such a gem. Just such a sweet, incredible human being. And we're going to talk all about relationships. And as you guys know, I'm super passionate about talking about conversations and communication, but relationships are kind of the bread and butter of a solid conversation and of getting all the things that you want and need in this life. Relationships are such an enriching part of life, and I cannot wait to bring Amber on right now and have you guys get to know her. So if you guys have any questions as Amber and I are chatting, feel free to drop them in the chat. Feel free to let us know what's coming up for you, and feel free to just kind of chime in as we're talking, because both of us are super passionate about relationships, and we want you to walk away from today kind of feeling a little bit stronger and a little bit more confident in your relationship. So let's bring Amber on. And while we're bringing Amber on, feel free to let us know in the comments where you are tuning in from. Hold on one sec. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm so sorry for the delay.
Oh, it's all good.
Literally, I was at the supermarket and I was just like, oh my God.
You know, sometimes things just happen like that, where it's like we can be super planned and have everything in our calendars and like we're depending on those notifications and those reminders, and then they just don't happen and you're like, "Oh, I was just carrying on with my life." Fuck.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Well, that kind of is a perfect segue into the topic of our chat today, because,
Yeah.
as human beings, none of us are perfect, right? We all make mistakes. Technology is nowhere near perfect. And, because you and I have formed a relationship, we were able to just kind of move past it and hop right on anyway without a
Oh, yeah.
problem,
Oh, yeah,
right?
totally. Yeah,
So,
100%.
and so I think that a lot of the times, like when we think about relationships, right, we often think about our romantic relationships. But I think that for today, I want to kind of focus on just relationships in general, the human aspect of relationships.
Yeah.
So tell me in your own words, um, what makes a good, empowering relationship with another
Uh,
human?
Communication, 100%. And communication and a willingness to be vulnerable and to really trust yourself and your own experience and to be able to share that with somebody else, whether it's a friend, a coworker, your spouse, your child, whatever. Like all of those things require a willingness to be vulnerable. And
Absolutely.
that comes through a willingness to speak up.
Absolutely. And so I love that you touched on communication, because I think that a lot of the times, I actually was just literally having a chat with one of my students like an hour ago about
Yeah.
how so many people, when they enter into relationships, whether romantic or business related or even friendships, kind of forget about how important communication is. So how can somebody, entering a relationship right off the get-go, practice good communication?
I think it's understanding that regardless of how well you think you might know somebody, you don't. Like, I've been with my partner for 5 years, and there's still times where he surprises me, where I'm like, really? I didn't know that you thought that, or that
Right.
you experienced that, or you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter how well you know somebody, you don't know them. And that goes in the reverse too. No matter how well you think somebody should know you, I'm like, oh, they should just know that this is how I'm feeling, or they should just know that this is what I'm experiencing. They don't know you. They're looking at
Absolutely.
life and you through their own experiences, their own filters, their own, their own shit. And they
Absolutely.
might not be picking up on the same things that you are because you're experiencing your own unique life. So I think it's just a reminder that we don't know each other as well as we think we do, and that's okay. We're not meant to. So
Right.
all the more reason why communication, and sometimes, especially in the beginning, over communication. I air quotes over communication. I don't
Right.
believe there's such a thing, but you know, really just like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I want, this is what I need, this is, you know, and then getting curious about the other person's experience too.
Absolutely. And I love that you touched on that because, when you spend a lot of time with somebody, especially like I've been with my husband for almost 11. Oh my God.
Oh,
Um,
congratulations. That's
Jeez.
beautiful.
But like there are so many times where like something will come up and one of our biggest arguments is he will say like I can't read your mind. Like I
Mm-hmm.
don't I know you like the back of my hand, but I'm also not in your brain. So like
Mm-hmm.
I think just remembering sometimes that like all the no matter how close we get with another person, whether it's a friend or a business partner or just a romantic partner, um, as much as we like to think that we are one unit and we operate as one unit, we are separate entities. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's super important to just when you find yourself getting angry, and I'd love to hear you touch on this, but like when you find
Yeah.
yourself getting frustrated, um, knowing that the other person can't read your mind and just kind of checking yourself before you start going for, like getting angry, ask
Mm-hmm.
yourself, like, does this person actually know that I'm upset? Do they know why I'm upset? Or is this something that I need to communicate?
Mm-hmm. So for me, anger usually shows up as resentment or frustration, where I'm like, they should know that I need help with whatever, or why aren't the dishes done, or whatever it is. And usually, you know, resentments are just unmet expectations. And usually those expectations are unmet because they weren't vocalized. And so usually when I find myself getting angry, that's like what you were just saying. It's like I need to check with myself and be like, did I actually make a request of like, hey, can somebody do the dishes? You know, my kids are old enough, they know how to do the dishes and stuff, but you know,
Right.
that they're kids. So it's like they're playing and doing all the other things that kids do. So it's like for
Right.
me, whether it's my partner or my children or whatever, it's like, did I actually say or make a request of what I needed or what I wanted in that moment? And
Right.
so there's something like a sacred pause, you know, where it's like you find yourself getting angry or frustrated or like you feel like you're going to explode. And it's like you got to take that moment to pause and really go inward and just take the time to self reflect and owning your side of the street and owning, did I say blah, 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 blah? Did I make that request? Do they even know? Because again, circling back to what we were just talking about, they don't know. What's important to
Absolutely.
you, to me, might not be important to my partner or my children or whatever. Like they could give two fucks about the kitchen being dirty, where I'm over here like, oh my god, the kitchen's dirty. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so like not having that same expectation that they are going to have the same priorities or the same wants as I
Absolutely.
do. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I really love that you touched a little bit on like taking accountability for like your side of the street because um I have found even like just in communicating with other people like um even if I'm super pissed off at somebody and even if they are 100% in the wrong, it is always more effective to before I begin to say why they are wrong and why they made a mistake
Mm-hmm.
to like from the get-go say, hey, I realize that like I may have said this way or I may have miscommunicated this, but if you right away or show some vulnerability and take some responsibility for your part in whatever situation, that person is not going to see you as coming at them aggressively and they're not going to
Right.
go into the defensive mode
Mm-hmm.
that often occurs when we get into tiffs with other people.
Totally. Well, and I think too the what you were just talking about goes along with like sharing your experience, right? Like because that's not debatable. And in my world, my experience is not up for debate. So, but you can share your experience of like, hey, when you said this, this made me like I felt blah 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 blah. Or hey,
Right.
when you did this, it reminded me of this other time that this similar circumstance happened. Maybe it wasn't with them or whatever, but somebody else, maybe a previous partner, whatever, and it made me feel like it brought up a lot of old feelings of anxiety or like whatever. And so I think when we can own our experience and just share how the other person impacted us,
Mhm.
it's not something that has to be argued. It's just sharing, right? It's like, you
Right.
said this, I experienced this. Can we try a different way? Like,
Absolutely.
whether it's, a tone or a volume or whatever, when somebody's communicating with us, it's like, hey, can you just bring it down a level? Because I'm feeling anxious, or it's making me want to leave the conversation, and I don't want to do that because you're important and this conversation is important, but I'm
Right.
experiencing fight or flight, and can we just like take a minute? And so I think anytime that we can own our experience and share that from a place, again, of just being vulnerable and honest and owning it, like, our experience is ours. Like, I'm
Right.
a firm believer that how we feel is determined by us, not by other people. So it's like, if we are experiencing certain things, that's another thing that we get to own and understand that the other person isn't responsible for that. But we do get to live in a world together and have a life together, whatever that, friends, family, whatever. And that needs communication so that both parties know kind of what the boundaries are of that relationship and how we want to be talked to.
Absolutely. And I find that, when you have those sorts of conversations and you regularly participate in, hey, this is how I felt when XYZ, or this is how I'm responding to your tone of voice or whatever, I find that it actually prevents problems from arising in the future. So it almost
Mm-hmm.
becomes not only a better method of resolving things, but it also becomes a better method of preventing things from really exploding and blowing up.
Totally.
Um,
I'll share this one story. It's one of my favorite stories, actually. So
ooh,
my partner is like a well-traveled man. He loves to travel. He loves to go do things. He loves to go on adventures. And a couple of years ago, we had plans to go on vacation. 2020 happened. I have
mhm,
children, and my schedule changed, and I couldn't go on vacation. So his
right,
vacation changed. So he was actually going to Tahiti for 6 weeks by himself. And
okay,
everybody that, like, I tell that to, they get all like, "Oh my God, by himself?" And I'm like, he can. He works for himself. He has no children. He's totally can. If I could, I would be there. But my other responsibilities as a mother and as an employee and all these things prohibit me from
right,
going. But that doesn't mean I don't want him to go. It's important, right?
right.
But, and I was having a lot of old stuff come up from other relationships, of just like fear of abandonment and, oh my God, please promise me you're coming home, and like all of
Right,
these things. And so I just told him, I was like, I love that you're going. I want you to go. This is so good for you and it's so good for us. But I just need you to know that this experience is bringing up all of these things for me. And so
right.
I just was like, so I made a request. I'm like, before you leave, because words of affirmation are my love language. And I was like, can you just write me a little note of like, that you love
Oh,
me and like
I
whatever. And
love
he
that.
totally did, right? And so that was my like one request. I was like, can you write me a little note before you leave, and can we connect in some way, whether messenger or text or whatever, every day, just so I know where you're at. I just need to connect.
Oh,
It doesn't have to be a phone call or whatever. And he did. And the whole time he was gone, I didn't feel any sort of way. I didn't feel anxiety. I didn't feel abandoned. I didn't feel any of those things because I voiced it ahead of time. Now, it wasn't easy for me to do that. And in fact, the conversation leading up to that, he was kind of like, what's going on? You're acting really like angry about
right,
me leaving, and I just don't know what I've done wrong. And then I
right,
kind of had to, like, again, that sacred pause of like sit with it and be like, I'm not actually angry, because anger in my world is like the tip of the iceberg, and then like underneath it is all of the
right,
actual emotions. And so for me, fear often comes out as anger. And I was like, oh,
right,
you know what? I'm actually not angry. I'm just kind of afraid because I'm feeling anxious because of all my other stuff.
right,
And he's like, oh, okay, like let's talk about that. And
right.
so that all comes from being willing to share your experience and to communicate your wants and to communicate your needs. And he was able to go and have a beautiful time, and I was able to be here and also have a beautiful time by myself and, just doing my own thing. And so it was a really cool experience and just a really good example of how important it is to actually own your experience and own what you need.
Right. And I love
So,
that. And I love somebody in the comments said this is so me. Like, yeah, like
mm-hmm.
that's so relatable. And Amber, if it's okay, I'd love to ask you, like, could you imagine how that whole experience would have gone with him being away had you not voiced that feeling?
Oh, I
Like,
know how it would have gone. And it would have been me, a crazy anxious mess, constantly checking my phone and like looking at his profile, like where's he at and what's he doing, and like is he okay? Like, you know what I mean? Like he's traveling all over this island, surfing and doing all these things, and it totally would have left me out of my own presence and out of my own body, worried about him and where he's at and what he's doing and why isn't he texting me, and it was
Right.
like, and he's on the other side of the planet. So it was like, you know, there was time different issues and like all these things. But with that conversation, I was able to settle and be in my own body and be in my own experience, in my own presence, in my own space, and allow him to do the same without the guilt and like that, like, oh my God, she's acting crazy because I'm gone. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it allowed us both just to be present with where we're at. And so when we did get to connect and video chat, and he's showing me around and telling me about his day, like it was easy. And it was like talking to him as if he was sitting right next to me, but he's on the other side of the planet. So
Absolutely. And that it's so beautiful, like that, like, yes, obviously it was difficult to gather the courage to express that to him, but
yeah,
at the end of the day, it probably brought the two of you closer, and it probably brought the two of you to a better understanding of one another. And then it
totally.
also allowed, just through having like what, an hour-long conversation at the most, it allowed you to enjoy 6 weeks of being apart.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is the power of conversation.
Well, and the cool part is too, is that gifts and giving is like his love language. And so he surprised me so that like maybe like once a week, he would be like, go check my, you know, sock drawer, and there would be a present in there for me. Or,
Oh, I love that.
yeah, or he got me like a weighted blanket so that I would have something like in bed to like cuddle me, because I'm very much a like, hey, cuddle me, you know what I mean? Like that, like physical attention and things like that. So like he did things on his own because he was just inspired to do them,
That
because
is
we had
so
like, I had
cute.
cleared my side of the street and I wasn't acting like a crazy angry girlfriend, and like, you know what I mean? So it created space to inspire him to find ways to connect in his own way. And so
That's
the whole
so
time
cute.
he's gone, and I felt totally loved and supported and connected. And yeah, it is so sweet. And I'm like, that's why it's one of my favorite examples of how powerful communication can be when you take that time to be really vulnerable. Because it is a vulnerable thing to be like, hi, I'm scared because
Yeah,
you're leaving on vacation. And that is bringing up a lot of anxiety for me. Like, we don't want to admit things that we feel like are faults or flaws,
right,
but we are all filled with faults and flaws. And I use
right.
those like terms loosely because I don't feel like they're flaws. It's just part of the human experience.
Absolutely. And by the way, Sean, that's my husband, if you're watching, take notes for the next time you go away because I want that.
Right? And it's so funny. My boyfriend's name is Sean too. I love that.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears a little bit because
Yeah.
both of us are business owners and we do have quite a large following of entrepreneurs. I always say that word wrong. Um, anyway, how can we bring this sort of communication of like tough conversations into our business? Like, how do we, for example, let's say I'm a client of yours and or let's say you have a client and they seem to be having a hard time paying their invoices. Like, how do we
Mm-hmm.
have that conversation?
Well, I think all conversations and ultimately outcomes are based on trust and respect for both parties.
Right.
And a lot of that comes from having healthy boundaries. And so for
Mm-hmm.
me, I like to just be very upfront. Like, people look at it as a contract or and whatever agreement or whatever, but just like, this is how it goes. And if for whatever reason you can't make your payment, or we need to pause or whatever, just tell me.
Mm-hmm.
It's an open door policy in my world. So it's like, you just have to
Right.
tell me, and then we can get creative, and then we could work together and problem solve. But if we aren't communicating, or like if my client isn't communicating, then they just all of a sudden ghost me or whatever, it's like, well, now there's no way for us to solve the problem because you've left the conversation,
Right.
right? Solving happens because two people stay in the conversation.
Right.
So I think for me, as far as business goes, it's all about just being super upfront about what our expectations are, what our boundaries are, and then also having expectations for how we're going to solve problems together. And then I feel
Absolutely.
like it kind of keeps a lot of like the messy sort of stuff out of the way,
Right.
because we both know like what's expected of both of us.
Absolutely. And I love that you touched on that, like that that mind piece again. It's like, I'm not you. I'm not in your shoes. I cannot read your mind. And so
Hmm.
if you're having a challenging time, as a result, as an adult, um, it's kind of each of our responsibilities to communicate and to
Hmm.
express when we are having a hard time or express when we need accommodation. Um,
Totally.
and so I just think it's what I want everybody to take away from this live, if you're watching, whether you're here watching live or you're watching the replay, is no matter what kind of relationship it is, the way to really empower not just yourself but the other person in the relationship is to encourage strong, like, just open communication at
Hmm.
every point.
Hmm.
Because there's so many things that can come up at any given point. Life is messy, gets ugly, life gets awkward, but it gets to be less awkward and it gets to be a lot less confusing and hard to deal with when you just find a way to communicate what you're struggling with or what you're
Hmm.
upset about or what you're frustrated about. Um,
Well, and also communicating the good stuff too. Sometimes we
yeah,
hold back on that as well because it's like,
you just
oh, we
read
don't
my
want.
mind because I was about to
Yeah.
go towards that. I love
Nice. Yeah,
that.
I love it. Yeah, because sometimes we get all like, oh, I don't want to make somebody else feel bad because I'm really happy or I experienced this really cool thing. And it's like, which I totally get because I've been there too. And there's still times where I'm like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to make anybody feel some type of way. But I think a lot of times when it comes to communication or conflict resolution or celebrating or whatever, sometimes we need to see people go first, right, and give permission to other people, like, oh no, she can do it, so can I.
Right.
And that goes along with like our friends and our partners too. It's like if we sometimes we get to go first of like, okay, I'm going to step up here and I'm going to talk about something that's hard for me, or I'm going to share something that might be kind of scary for me or whatever, because I want them to know that they can in turn talk to me too, because how the people in my life are feeling is super important to me. And if they don't
Absolutely.
feel like they can talk to me, then what's the point?
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's actually kind of reminding me of a conversation I had with a friend recently. I was going through a kind of a hard time and we were just chatting about it, and she said she was kind of telling me like, "Oh, like I have some really good news, but like I don't want to like drop it on you right now even you're going through something." I'm like, "Oh my God, girl, like share. I want to
Yeah.
celebrate you. I want to smile. Like that will take my mind off of things." And like
Mm-hmm.
by doing that, I was setting a standard that like even if I'm having a hard time, I still want to hear your positive news.
Right. Yeah.
So like you said, it's all about sometimes going first and taking that first step,
Mm-hmm.
letting our people know that like even when you're having a hard time, it's okay to celebrate. I'm still happy for you, even if I'm struggling on my own. And
Yeah.
that's really the power of great communication, but also powerful relationships is knowing that like when you set the standard that other people can celebrate themselves even when you're having a hard time, you are now opening the gate for you to celebrate even if other people are having a difficult time. Um,
Totally.
have you ever experienced that, like where you've been afraid to share your positives because you weren't sure how somebody would take it if they were dealing with a negative?
Sure. 100%. The human experience is both light and dark. It's heavy and light. It's like, it's just all the things, right? And so while you might be in this light space and like things might be going really good for you, you might be having a really good friend that's struggling, whether it's, you know, a job or a relationship or grief or whatever. And it's like, it can be really hard to be like, oh, I know that you are experiencing this really hard thing, and I don't want to take away from that, but I also want to share my experience. And I think, again, that's where taking the time to really ask too can be really helpful, is like, even where like conflict, right? Be like, hey, I really have this hard thing, or not even conflict, but like say you're just having a hard day and you want to talk to your partner about it. Be like, hey, do you have time to support me right now? Or like, listen, do you have the space to listen? And
Right.
because sometimes we don't. It's like, give me 10 minutes. I just walked in the door and, just give me 10
Right.
minutes and then I'll have the space. So giving that person the opportunity to say, actually, I can't right now. I can't give you that space, whether it's good or bad, I think is really important, because it just gives the other person permission to say, actually, no, I don't.
I
And then it's
love
like,
it.
okay, oh, that's totally fine. I'm going to talk to my best friend then, or I'm going to call my mom, or I'm going to, find somebody else who maybe does have the space in this moment to support me or celebrate with me. And it's okay that the other person might not have that space, good or bad, right? We all have a wide variety of the human experience. And there are times where it's like, I love you so much, but I can't listen to anything right now. My mind
Right.
is too busy. Check
Absolutely.
back with me in an hour or tomorrow or whatever. I would love to hear what you have to say, but it can't be right now.
I
And
love
then finding other support in that.
Right, and that actually kind of brings me to like even hearing like on the other side of that is hearing hard things. Sometimes we don't always know how to respond when somebody shares a difficult moment. Like
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes I've experienced where somebody didn't ask if I had the space to listen, right? And now I'm just kind of in this situation where I've got to listen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I, in the past, have certainly struggled with saying, how do you want me to respond right now?
Mm-hmm.
But now that I've learned that, like now that I've learned how to just say, okay, like I'm listening. Like I'm at the point where now you've got my attention. But before we go any further, how would you like me to support you right now? And
Yeah.
that has been a really powerful tool to kind of keep both parties happy because um, as somebody who I absorb information, but I always tend to want to like give advice. That's not
Yeah.
always welcome, right?
Yeah, me too.
Um, so what would you say to somebody who's now in a situation where they're hearing something that they weren't quite ready to hear, but how do we respond to that? How do we deal with that?
So I think you touched on it already. One of my favorite tools is like, do you want me to listen or do you want advice? And I use this with my son quite frequently, actually, because he's 12 and sometimes he just wants to talk about whatever. And as a mom, I'm like, I want to fix it. And who do I need to talk to? And like, whatever. And
Right.
he's just like, Mom, I'm just sharing my experience. Like, just stop. And so that's one that I use a lot with him. It's like, do you want me to listen or do you want me to help? And it's also good too because I know like with me and my partner, he's very much a man and like wants to fix things and make things better. And sometimes he's like, I don't know what you want from me. And so I will start the conversation with, I just need you to listen.
Right.
Like, I don't actually need you to fix anything. There's nothing to be fixed. I just need somebody to talk to and you're my person. So I just need you to listen. So that is how I would kind of deal with that if I'm in a conversation and I'm like, I don't know what they need from me. I would just ask. Because again,
Right.
we don't know what the other person needs. And if there's also the opportunity where I'm like, regardless of what they need from me right now, I don't have the space for it, you got to own it and be like, sis, I love you so much. Can we have this conversation in like an hour? Or
Right.
can we have this conversation tomorrow? I would love to hold space for you, but I can't because of XYZ. And owning it and having
Absolutely.
it and then not attaching the story that we're a bad friend or a bad person or a bad partner or a bad whatever. It's like, I love you so much and I want to be able to give this my full attention, but I can't right now. And
Absolutely.
letting that be okay.
I love that. Well, I cannot believe it's been a half an hour. This
I know,
flew by
right?
already.
I know.
Um, and I feel like we could talk about just all the different parts of relationships, communicating for hours and hours, but I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
take up too much of your time. So, how can people work with you? Tell us all about your offers and what you got going on and who you are, because I totally forgot to ask that in the beginning. I got so excited. So we're
It's all
doing it
good.
backwards.
Right. Yeah. So I am a life coach. I specialize in communication and relationships. I believe that women are the most magical creatures on the planet, but we are often taught and shown that our words and our voice and our opinions and what we need and what we want are not as important as other people's. And I think that that is fucking bullshit. So my joy in life is empowering women to speak up for what they want and they need. And specifically in relationships, because I love love and I feel like we are wounded in relationships, but we are also healed in relationships as well. So as far as like working with me, I have one-on-one packages and I have an empowered relationships course that's coming out probably in November. I have been
Ooh,
on a social media detox as I've been healing from surgery. So this is the first time people have seen me in a couple of weeks, but you can go to my website, ambergram.com, or my Instagram is at ambergram _ and it has all the information, all the details. But yeah, I'll be back
love it.
full force in November. So yeah, super
I
excited.
love it. Good for you for doing a social media detox. I'm
Thanks.
trying and kind of failing at it, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Let it
Yeah,
be
I feel
okay.
that. Yeah, it's interesting how social media plays a part in our everyday lives. And just in the 2 weeks alone, I've read like 3 books, and like I'm like, oh, there's all this time for all this other stuff. So
That's
it's kind of an
amazing.
interesting experiment. So
I love
yeah.
that. Amazing. Well, guys, definitely hit up Amber. She has an amazing Facebook group too, I believe, right?
I do.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, and she's just such an amazing, heart-led, soul-led human being.
Oh,
So
thank
I love
you.
her mission. I love her passion, and I'm sure that she will be a guest again after her social
I
media
would love to.
break.
I would love
Awesome.
that. Thank you so much for
Awesome.
having me. I appreciate you.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, babe. Bye.
Bye. Ooh, bye.